Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing of the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 105. It's developing for Crosswalk. And today on our panel, we have Leon Revel.
Hey, everyone.
Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And myself, Eric Isaacson. Our guests today are Alexis Menard.
Hi.
And Kenneth Christiansen.
Hey.
So you guys, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? What you've been up to with Crosswalk?
Yeah, sure. My name is Kenneth Christiansen. I work at Intel. I have been a browser engineer since 2006. Worked on WebKit, later Plink, Chrome, and lately like web standards and IoT. And together with Alexis Menard, who's also on the call, we created the Crosswalk project at Intel. So maybe Alexis want to introduce himself.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis. I worked on the web for at least WebKit since 2000, I'd say 8-9. And then after I moved to Blink. And then, as Kenneth said, then we both created a Crosswalk project at Intel back in 2013.
Awesome. So you guys have been at it for almost 3.5 years, right? Something like that?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Time flies.
And you're not sick of it yet, so that's a good sign. The project itself, Crosswalk, for those who don't know what it is, can you explain kind of what it is and why you created it?
Yeah, I can try to do that. So Crosswalk is a kind of like runtime. It's based on Chromium and Blink. So it's not a browser as Chrome itself, but more like an application runtime. We created original because we are big proponents of the web. So we're trying to push forward new standards, improve the web for users, and some of that we could do in Chrome itself. It's of course an upstream project, has to go through review by Google. And Crosswalk, that gave us like our own kind of like runtime where we could do our own experiments, and we could also like modify it and use it for other products. For instance, say I wanted to use like Crosswalk for a TV product or a digital display or something like that. It gives us this opportunity. Another thing that we looked at was Android. And we really wanted like users to use the web, both on iOS and Android. And on Android, there was the problem with fragmentation, especially like older browser versions. So people were trying to make a web app. They deployed it to the Play Store, and they found that some of the users were on like older versions of Android, and everything broke. It was really difficult to test. And people, they were like having to figure out, are we going to stay on the web, or are we going to move to like native development? So with Crosswalk, we added that runtime where people could distribute Crosswalk with their app and get the same level of web feature compatibility across all Android versions.
Yeah, when we launched Crosswalk, I think back in 2013, Ice Cream Sandwich, I think was around 20-30% market share on the Play Store, and then on Ice Cream Sandwich, you had basically a web view that was, 3 years old. So, innovating using the brand new specification coming from W3C was just not possible for the developers.
Yeah, I think people forget just how bad that embedded web view was across all those different types of things that sort of existed. Because there was, I think fragmentation is a very soft word for it. I mean, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, I think if you want to kind of do anything modern on Android 4.4 or less, you get some serious problems with the way it kind of interprets CSS or all kinds of things. So Crosswalk saved me quite a few times.
Yeah, and we actually see, I actually think it has saved a lot of people, because if you look at the amounts of different tools using Crosswalk today, it's like there's a lot of different tools. And after we got like support in Cordova, like PhoneGap, we have seen a lot of people adopt Crosswalk as well. There's some people complaining about the size, because like people don't want like these big sizes and installing these big apps on their phone. So we also launched the Crosswalk Lite product, where we tried to remove things that regular people didn't use so much, like WebRTC, and thus like cut down on the file size.
And you've also got through anybody who kind of builds hybrid apps, they'll be familiar with Cordova most likely, and you've got a Cordova plugin as well, so it's super easy to use in your already existing hybrid Cordova apps, correct?
Right.
Yeah, it's a one command line basically to switch from the Android system web view to Crosswalk as the rendering backend, basically.
Cool. And how easy is it to kind of keep up to date with with Crosswalk as it kind of introduces new features of the browser and stuff like that?
So one of the things we try with Crosswalk is that we rebase with Chromium, like following the Chromium schedule. So they try to do that every 6 weeks. So of course we're delayed about a week or two, depending on how difficult it is to do the rebase. So this is the same for users. Like they can decide when they want to upgrade or not. So we always try to bring the latest and greatest of the web to Crosswalk. One of the things we've heard from a lot of people, actually for companies, is that they don't like the web view on Android updating automatically. It's kind of like a weird thing because we're like, I really love the web and you're used to the browser updating and everything is just supposed to work. But you do have these companies like banks, it's like one example that needs to get certification, certified, like their apps, like what it does and how it works. And every time something updates, they'll have to go through that process again, which might cost like $100,000. So this is not like a thing that you want to do like every 6 weeks.
That was actually one of the selling points for us using it at work as well, is having complete control over when that kind of upgrade happens. So you know that when you're releasing new things to customers and stuff, you know exactly what they're using to kind of view the hybrid side of the application. So that can be useful to a lot of people. I can see why.
Yeah.
However, we encourage people to stick with the latest version for obvious reasons, as bug fixes, security improvements, or security fixes and everything. So I just wanted to make sure everyone gets aware of that.
Yeah, we also have like a library version that you can link to, which will then get upgraded automatically. So,
cool.
Depending on your use case.
Definitely some good points, especially with the security.
Yeah.
I noticed that it's BSD license. Is that the same as what Cordova is?
We inherit BSD license because the Chromium project, so you cannot just relicense everything. So Chromium is basically BSD. So we decided that all the parts we are going to add, the code of Crosswalk itself will be BSD as well, because that would make sense. It's a very permissive license. So that was the idea. But I think Cordova is Apache, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I just checked. It's Apache. It's Apache 2.0.
So when we talk about Crosswalk, we're talking about sort of the embedded web building experience, and Crosswalk runs a lot of places. I mean, we talk a lot about the mobile platforms, things like Android, things like iOS, but you guys have the ability to create Linux packages, dev files. You have things to create Windows applications. You have that wrapper as well. From a web development standpoint, how is this different? Like, what are sort of the things that developers should know about sort of what they get with a sort of Crosswalk experience as a developer?
So if you stick with our tools, our packaging tool that we have, which we distribute on NPM, you basically, as a web developer, one good thing is that if you stick with this, then you can deploy on various different platforms with a single command line, basically. You just run the npm package tool, and then you're just good to go. And then it output the packages for you. A bit like Cordova, kind of. It's just that our packaging tool is a lot simpler than Cordova for different reasons, that we don't have like that basically long history baggage of complicated distributions that basically Cordova supports. But so you get this. You basically take your web app, and then you can basically package it and deploy it quickly in various different platforms and OSs.
And do you get more APIs at that level? Like, we talk about sort of the web API stack, and as we all know and love, the web APIs these days are sort of rapidly evolving into a land of wonderful goodness that I'm really happy with. But from a embedded standpoint, do you get additional wrappers on top of sort of native APIs that developers can be able to use?
So Crosswalk ships with an extension system, which works on Android, Windows, Linux, where you can quickly expose native API or a bit of native code in JavaScript. So as a web developer, you're like, oh, I'm missing something. The spec is not ready, is not shipping, but I still need to ship my app, so I could just quickly write an extension. So on Android, it's going to be in Java. On Windows, it can be .NET or C++ or C, and then on Linux, obviously C++ or C. And so then you can expose the native capabilities quickly, a bit like the Cordova or PhoneGap plugins, basically. The other extra APIs that we ship part of Crosswalk is, for a while actually, is SIMD, which is now being upstreamed in Google Chrome. The other one that we had for a couple of years as well is the presentation API, which Google announced maybe a week ago that they would be natively built in Chrome. That's something that, as a web developer using Crosswalk, you could do for a while actually on Android for at least a good year and a half. You could already leverage this. We were supporting WebCL, though we are planning to drop it. Not so many users, so we checked out the water, didn't work out. All right, let's take it away. And then what else do we? Oh yes, the 3D RealSense kind of 3D media capture spec that we're actually contributing right now as we speak. It's not yet shipping anywhere, but you can use it in Crosswalk on Windows, for example. So if you have a RealSense laptop, with like this Windows Halo type of camera, then you can actually leverage that in JavaScript and have depth information. So you could, I don't know, do, for example, if you're doing a photo app, then or like an editing photo app, then you can actually leverage this to apply filters or whatever.
I've got a quick question. What is the significance between like a Crosswalk extension and a Cordova plugin? You said they're similar, but kind of what are the benefits over like doing a Crosswalk extension? And kind of what's the difference?
Hard to say. I mean, they are very different. They're not so much different, I would say, but there were a couple of features. Basically, so the way you talk to the native and the JavaScript world is basically message passing API type of things. It's very simple, it's very primitive, it's very low level. On Windows and Linux, we actually have a kind of a shared memory type of thing. So, for example, the RealSense extensions, the extension that we ship on Windows, this one uses actually a shared memory so that we can actually output the frames of the camera quicker in JavaScript. But in terms of like functional comparison, I don't think there is much of a difference. It's just that at the time when we created this extension system, it was targeted for a different operating system. Where we didn't have, we were sure that we will never add Cordova on it, so that's why. And also on Windows, the reason we did it was also that we could provide .NET extensions, which I don't think you can write Cordova plugins in .NET. So, which means that in .NET you have a lot more APIs to expose if you need.
Okay.
Yeah, so Cordova is something that came later, and for people that want to use Cordova. So Cordova is also like, if you don't need Cordova, it's a big thing to add to your project. Yep. So the Crosswalk extension system is very simple, and it's designed to work across like multiple platforms. So the base is the same on all these platforms, and the support for different languages is native support is built on top of that.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to add as well is that on Windows and Linux, obviously not Android, but on Windows and Linux, and I'm not sure the Cordova APIs, the Cordova plugins work that way, but at least on Crosswalk, the plugins, they run, each extension run in a separate process. So I mean, one process for all the extensions. So if, for example, you're crashing in the native code, at least the app doesn't die. Basically, you can gracefully handle the problems in the web. I mean, on the application side of things.
Cool. Thank you.
It strikes me as very difficult to do. Like, I mean, when you talk about, oh, hey, I want to compile, Chrome somewhere, that's one thing. But the amount of stuff that's built into Crosswalk in terms of the extensions, even for the iOS side, right? You guys extend WK WebView to give it just a little bit more, right? You can write extensions within the sort of native API space for there, which a lot of other things can't do either. This must, I mean, How many people do you have working on Crosswalk at any given time? This seems like quite the to-do.
Yeah, I think we have, I mean, if you strip out QA and stuff like that, I think we are probably around 20, most likely. But we have a big infrastructure behind the project, a bit like what you have in Chromium with the waterfall where auto test. We have nightly builds. We have QA doing nightly builds and nightly testing and stuff like that. So we have a bunch of people, and the rebase is a significant effort.
Yeah, so you also should keep in mind that there's a lot of people that don't work like full time on Crosswalk. So we do have we're trying to like upstream first. So if we have like a patch, something we want to do for Crosswalk, we often ask ourselves, could this go into Chrome? So once in a while, sometimes we just like go ahead, like try to push it upstream. Sometimes we see this might take a while, so we do it in parallel, try to do it upstream and try to get it into Crosswalk before. So we always have this upstream first approach.
The presentation API was an example where we landed first in Crosswalk because we didn't have buy-in at the time, and then as soon as we could, we just moved upstream because there was no reason to maintain that in our forks, basically.
That's actually, I mean, I think that's very important to point out too, as we sort of discuss this, because I mean, some people will look at projects like Crosswalk and say, you're fighting against the web. You're fighting against the standards the web's built on. You're trying to build for native platforms. I don't like that. But you're really not. You're working in conjunction with the web to try to get your code, the sort of things that web developers write, because so much of our code is built for the web these days, as many places as it can be. So I think that's a very important distinction people should understand, that you're not fighting against the standard, that you're trying to push forward with this idea of, you know, that extensible web.
Yeah, basically, like when we created Crosswalk, we took the same approach as which they did with like PhoneGap. Said that PhoneGap will succeed when we don't need PhoneGap any longer. So we did have like the use case of having our own runtime, which you can use on other products, maybe even like IoT devices with screens. That would be like an option. But at the same time, like doing the work for Android, like we're really looking forward and really happy that there's an updatable web view on Android now, that it's becoming part of Chrome itself in the latest version of Android. So if at some point no one needs Crosswalk just for these like embedded or special device use cases, then we've kind of succeeded. So this is one thing else is like I'm one of the co-editors of the manifest specs. This also shows that we've been actually working a lot at Intel on progressive web apps and trying to figure out like how does that story work out? Like how does it work together with IoT, Web Bluetooth, Web NFC, generic sensor APIs? So we're trying to push the web as a whole forward. And Crosswalk is just one of those tools for doing so.
And it's been wildly successful. I mean, you look at sort of the integrations that Crosswalk has across the board, particularly on the tooling side. I mean, there's not many places Crosswalk isn't at this point in terms of tools for developers to use on any given day to help their web app go a little bit further. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think at this point, I think we have over 10,000 apps on the Play Store, something like this. And I'm not counting PRC Play Store because this is very complicated. There are many of them. So, but yeah, big numbers as well over there as well.
Yeah, I think we had some apps with like, was it like in the millions, like installs? I think I even saw like 10 million for one app. So it's doing pretty well. And I actually think it's even doing better. Like Alexis says, we don't know what's going on in PRC. It's difficult to keep track of. But we do have a lot of people working out of like PRC. Like the People's Republic of China, and they work together with a lot of big companies in China, like actually having some of these apps running on Crosswalk.
So I know Eric, you want to talk about code sharing, Eric. I know it's on your list. We should talk about code sharing.
Yeah, we should.
So you want to ask that question, or do you just want me to ramble? Because I'll ramble all day long.
Well, I think that as developers, we do have this ideal, thought of, as web developers at least. Well, code once and then ship everywhere, right? What's the reality to that varies based on how you ship. So some of the things that people claim on a lot of the projects is that, well, you can share all of your code or most of your code and build for every platform, every device. And I just want to know, what's the reality with Crosswalk? Like for instance, in React Native or any React applications, you could share services and share. You could do this with Ionic and Angular, right? But your views will be different. So what's the story with Crosswalk? Is it similar?
Well, I think it might be slightly better because this is the web. But as Alexis said, like if you use like plugins, they work different on each platform. So if you expose something yourself, it's not exposed by default. You have to expose it on all the platform you're using. There's also the issues with iOS. So on iOS, as you might know, the only allowed rendering engine is WebKit. So we cannot build Chromium for iOS and ship that with Crosswalk. So Crosswalk on iOS is based on WebKit, and there are some differences there as well. So just like when you're writing an app for Safari on iOS, you have to take the same thing into consideration.
So what you're saying is providing the code you're writing is web code, for lack of a better word, then obviously that is going to be the same across all your different devices. But if you extend it out into some native code, obviously that'll be different depending on the platform you're putting it on.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, writing the plugin itself will be different. I mean, you'll probably use Objective-C on iOS and then Java on Android. But what you could do to improve your code sharing is that the JavaScript API that you're exposing back into your application could be similar or the same. So then you don't need to worry a lot about the underlying implementation. So I mean, the actual web code is probably the same or similar. That's one trick.
Yeah, we've done that ourselves. Like when we have exposed APIs, because it's using message passing. You don't want to send too many messages. You don't want to do context switching. It's slower. So as much as we could do on the JavaScript side, we did in JavaScript itself. So we even had some special APIs that gave you access to a few things that you normally don't have in JavaScript.
And because this is web standards and web views, what's the differences in approaches? Like if you were going to build something with native code or this, or if you're using some JavaScript API wrapper where it's just build stuff without web views based on JavaScript.
In my opinion, it all boils down to what technology and what framework you're going to use. I mean, if you're going to use, for example, something based on web components, and then you want to go iOS, well, then that's certainly going to be a polyfill with performance not being sometime on par with Android. So, it all boils down to what technology stack you're actually choosing and what type of design your app is going to be. So if you're using a custom design, all branded, where you don't really try to, be integrated with the OS, which is good or not, depending what you're doing, then your web code can be shared a lot between one OS to the other. However, if you're trying to integrate, with nice buttons and that looks like iOS, for example, with the Ionic views, they look different. So then the code will be different. So per choice, depends on what you're designing, how it looks like, how it integrates with the platform. And then if you're going the route where it can be shared, a maximum can be shared, then Crosswalk is helping you in that direction, because with one command, you can output a Android package and then an iOS package, and you're good to go.
Actually, I wanted to point out one thing else is that as this is web, you can actually write a progressive web app and just have it distributed on the internet. People will find it and install it. And maybe just to get a bit more exposure, maybe some people that just want to be in the store as well, some companies, well, then just use Crosswalk for that. Then you can have the best of both worlds. You can have Crosswalk working with a hosted app or progressive web app as well. So we're all about bringing things to the web, improving the web, and Crosswalk is just another distribution channel. You might also have progressive web app that when it's hosted in Crosswalk, you get a few additional features, somewhat similar to what Microsoft does on Windows 10, where you have if you put an app, a posted app like progressive web in the web store, you can actually access a few extra Windows APIs and extend the app, like progressive enhancement.
What is the debugging story since it's messaging and all this, it seems very low level. How do you get around that black box going back and forth?
So in Crosswalk, the way you typically debug is the same as Chrome, where you basically bring up the web inspector. So if you run on Android, you can bring up the web inspector on your dev machine and then debug the JavaScript code. On Windows, if you want to debug the extension itself, so on Android, typically you'll attach the debugger to the process, the extension. On Android, actually, it's monoprocess. So you'll basically attach to the running app and then debug with GDB, which is very slow. So that can be tricky. But for example, on Windows or Linux, since you have a separate process for the extension, then you can just attach the debugger to the process and then debug it, like you will debug any native app, basically. So in Visual Studio or in Xcode or any other IDE you may use, basically.
Yeah, the debugging story is actually pretty good. No, I just think the experience is quite nice. Debugging is really not that bad if you've worked with those tools before, which is why the ecosystem is so big. Because we really haven't talked about the ecosystem, but there are a lot of plugins, in the Crosswalk sort of ecosphere of things, and then you start to add in just the entire ecosystem of Cordova and everything else across these platforms. It's quite large. Like there's a lot you can do that's, I don't want to say necessarily turnkey, but it's not too bad. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. Also, one convenience that we provide for whoever likes to printf or terminal output debug, the stuff that is outputted from the extension process is automatically thrown into the main process for convenience. So you can still debug with ADB, Lotcat, or stuff like that, all what's happening in the extension. So it helps you. It's not optimal, but it helps.
Useful when you need to hack on something very quick.
Yes.
Just pointing that out.
Also, like the extension is just like it's message passing, but like what we have been doing is using JSON. So on JavaScript side, you just use JSON. It writes it into a string, send it to the other side. There are small libraries in C and C++ that makes it really, really easy to work with JSON. Yeah. And that just makes it really easy to make plugins. Like I've written a few myself, and it's like, this is like really simple. Everyone can basically do it if you have a bit of experience.
It's on C++, it's Pico JSON, and then on .NET, it's actually built in .NET itself. So you can serialize and deserialize the JSON very quickly.
Yeah. What do you guys see as the future of Crosswalk? Like, what's the next big leap?
Well, that's always the question, isn't it? like I said, like what I've been promoting myself lately is like progressive web apps. So I think that Crosswalk has done a lot for the ecosystem, has kept a lot of people using web technology, and I'm trying to provide those people like a better, more webby experience. So that's why we're working on standards. That's why we're helping on Web Bluetooth, Web NFC, generic sensor APIs, Web App Manifest, on all of these technologies. So I think that Crosswalk will become more like a product for like use cases where the web doesn't cover it today. Like for people that really want their app in the App Store, people that really need a specific API. Or maybe for new devices, it could be like IoT devices with screens. It could be like a display in a store, like small kiosks and things like this. Like use cases where Chrome and the browser isn't ready yet. So the idea is not to take over the world, but the idea is to promote and make the web take over the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're looking at is how it makes sense on Android, how is looking the landscape on Android, and how the web platform is improving so that you don't really need Crosswalk anymore, and then only those very targeted apps will basically require Crosswalk, but the majority of apps actually do not require a special runtime because what Google provides is good enough.
Or what Mozilla provides, or Edge, or what else?
Well, whatever the runtime you're targeting on, or if you're targeting Windows 10 and Edge is good enough for you, then, I mean, our job was done. I mean, we improved the web platform so much that you don't need a special runtime.
One of the other things we did with Crosswalk is that we do realize that a lot of other companies out there that needs like a platform like Crosswalk. So there are like some rumors, like I think like Samsung announced that they're using Crosswalk for some of their future Tyson TVs. So we're trying to make it easy for people to get this runtime that's optimized for embedding use cases, and it still gets updated like Rebase with Chrome. Because what I don't want is that someone to like launch a TV with a runtime and then after 5 years it's still the same old version, so it's holding the web back. So one of the ideas we set out to do with Crosswalk is to not have these cases where some product is holding back the web. As I personally saw, like the old Android browser is one of those products that was actually doing that. Because everyone was trying to say, hey, the web is awesome, but I need to support this platform. I need to support this browser. So I really want to get rid of that. And I realize for browsers today it's more or less solved because everyone's talking about evergreen browsers. It's Edge on Windows, Chrome on other platforms. Safari is also getting updated more frequently. But there are also these embedded use cases where this is not always the case. And like big companies like Netflix will still need to support all these old TVs. And so they might not be able to adopt new web technologies, and I think that's really sad. And that's holding the web back.
Yeah, the embedded use case is pretty rough. I mean, if you've worked in embedded with sort of the website of that, because there are lots of devices out there that have an embedded web runtime that you're probably building on with some sort of wacky API layer that kind of looks like the web but doesn't really look like the web, and then you're sad because nothing renders the same and your pipeline's crap. It just all is kind of squishy. That happens a lot more than I think people realize. These days, when you do sort of find Crosswalk sort of in the fibers of those systems, that is a big win for the web. And again, it's one of those things that I think people overlook because they probably haven't had to work on them necessarily. But with, sort of as web developers, we continuously are looking for the next responsive screen to implement our stuff on. You may have to use one of those embedded runtimes soon enough.
Yeah, and with IoT, everything's going to have a screen. Everything from your toothbrush to your fridge or all the kind of crazy devices. And being able to, imagine having different environments. You'd have to build those, hybrid applications for all those different crazy devices. Having to do that separately every time is going to be an utter nightmare. So having a consistent platform to build your user interfaces across all these different things is going to be amazing, and this is going to help.
Yeah, if you're out there right now, if you're going to do the internet-connected toothbrush, make sure that it pushes notifications through vibrations so that you can actually hear notifications as you're brushing your teeth. Free product idea, you heard it here first. Podcast. We take 7.5% of revenues. Thank you.
Always pushing the platform. Good job, man.
Yeah.
Pushing and brushing.
So on the note of progressive web applications, I know we mentioned it a few times. The manifest is extremely interesting to me because, not just for service worker for caching and networking strategies, but also for discoverability. So you're working on that spec, Kenneth. Yeah. How do you see kind of that helping discoverability?
Well, like the web is a place for discoverability itself. So this has always been you can create search engines. So with the web app manifest and with progressive web apps, we made it possible that these apps can be installable. They can be added to your home screen. That it has all the relevant meta information about the how it should launch the app, title, description, icons, and all of that. So of course, we are hoping that companies like Google would eventually integrate that in the search engine. We're already seeing Microsoft looking at integrating and using the manifest for their store itself. So far, they've been using a tool they created called Manifold.js, where you could provide your web app manifest. It will generate a Windows package for you, which you could push to the store. And they're trying to integrate this even further. So you just make your progressive web app. You just give the store URL. It'll figure out everything itself. But we're definitely looking for other ways of discoverability. So search engines. There's also the physical web project. So if that can start using and pulling out their info from the web app manifest, that could also be pretty cool.
Cool. Yeah, the spec's pretty solid right now too. I mean, as someone who had to write a parser for manifest files the other day, works pretty well. So, when you discover them and, parse them and display some information for some random things that I can't talk about. But regardless, works pretty well so far. I mean, and you look at how the manifest came about, though. I think this is key, too, when we talk about Crosswalk as a whole, because we all sort of knew, like we needed this, like when the rise of mobile sort of popped up, right? And like, hey, how discoverability sort of changed. And discoverability is hard now, even in app stores. I think that's the general consensus at this point, right? Net zero app installs a month. Yikes. Yay, mobile web. You should have a mobile website too. Just have that app. But when you're starting to develop sort of things for Crosswalk that are very future vision-y, like, are you looking at the web and saying, man, I wish the web did this, and going, I wonder if Crosswalk can do this first?
Well, maybe we have done that.
Sorry, that's just a
few
mean
times.
question.
I think that what I do is that I look like we want the web to do this, and then we find the best path. So, like for instance, Web NFC, we don't have that in Crosswalk, but we're doing that directly in Chrome. Because it
Which
just
I'm
made
super excited about.
just made like a whole much more sense. So it kind of depends. Like I don't think we're trying to promote Crosswalk more than the web itself. We're always looking at the web first. I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, and Crosswalk is the mean for you to achieve it in where the platform does not provide you the solution for it.
Yeah,
Sounds
I
like
think
3 full-time jobs right there.
Yeah.
so many full-time jobs. And I think that's key too, because, right, I mean, you're not gonna, I mean, the big question of the day lately is progressive web apps on the desktop. Why does it kind of work, but not all the way, right? Because the icon problem is still one of those things that hasn't been resolved yet. That's not quite as easy to do as per.
Is that seriously what everybody's getting upset about? It's an icon? Like,
No. I think the problem with desktop is that people using desktop browsers differently today. So like, I don't know if I really wanted like Google like Gmail as a separate window, or whether I want it in a tab, because people have gotten really used to using tabs for everything. So there's some kind of UX things that need to be like thought a whole lot about. So for a calculator, yeah, I definitely want it in the window, in the floating window on top of my screen. I don't want that in a tab. It doesn't make any sense. But like, someone has to look at these use cases. And what we're seeing, if you look at a company as Google, it's understandable that they're working on mobile first, because like the markets where everything's growing is like Asia. Like, look at India, it's growing a lot. There's even Africa. And these places are mobile. Not just mobile first, but most of the time mobile only. So that's kind of like my take. So I'm pretty sure that everyone wants progressive web apps to work on the desktop. But there's a lot of, we need to figure out how to solve the UI problem, the UX. And then there's like resources, there need to be resources there. So I think I'm really happy that Microsoft is taking a stab at this. And if they do it, maybe we can do it for other platforms as well. And I think it's pretty essential, because like we heard that Chrome apps are being deprecated on all platforms but Chrome OS. So maybe the future of Chrome apps on Chrome OS isn't that big either. So like, we definitely would like these progressive web apps, at least me personally, on Chrome OS, because they're getting like Android apps now. So I don't want a world where people just install the Android app on Chrome OS and forget about the web. And I think like progressive web apps is the key to solve this.
Well, and the platform's come so far. You know, you've both sort of discussed it today. You know, the platform has moved forward, and to some extent, you know, I know there's a lot of chatter out there in the world of, you know, oh, those things got deprecated because Android's there now, and yada yada yada. But from my standpoint, the more optimistic Justin, I look at it and say the web has grown as a whole. Like, we have a lot more API footprint to do the things that we want to do that we couldn't do before. You know, you look at Web Bluetooth is a really good example of that. Like, there's amazing things you can do with Web Bluetooth now.
It's actually quite funny, because like I have the Asus Flip, so it supports Android apps. So I was like, oh, excited, let me try to install some Android app on my Chrome OS. And I'm just like looking, I don't know what to install. Like, I have everything which I really need. The only thing I really wanted to install was like games. So I think like that will probably be the major use case, I hope at least. But even games will be brought to the web via like a web assembly, which will allow you to like write pretty performing apps which can live online, and even with service worker support offline. So I think that for most of these like apps, these games that people are playing, the web can be implemented using web technology very soon.
Yeah, and being the platforms are so very different too. Like, I can imagine there'd be a lot of UX, like, flame wars, for lack of a better term. Because I mean, the way that like even with just the phones, right? The way that a Windows phone, an Android phone, and an iOS phone works is just there's all these little differences. There's no consistency, some, but not a lot of consistency, right?
I find the crashes to be consistent. I enjoy the nonstop.
But this is also the thing, like with the web, like we've had responsive apps, responsive design for a while. So a lot of people, companies are used to create like responsive designs now. So they scale pretty well. But I still think that some of these things also depend on Chrome OS, because if everyone just use like a full screen app in a tab, then people will do like a desktop app and a mobile app. Because like, for instance, look at one of these like very popular progressive web app, like Flipkart in India. If you open it on your desktop and you make the window small, it will break, because like they say, hey, you're not a mobile device, let me serve you the desktop version. And so if we get like this user interface, for instance, in Chrome OS, where maybe like apps, like on Windows, you can have a small app on the side. It could be your calculator. Maybe that will make people make sure that these new progressive web apps will work in all kinds of different screen resolutions, and not just be mobile only or desktop only, or having two.
No, that's a good point. I mean, there is somewhat of a disconnect that I can't build a progressive web app on desktop today because it's only for a mobile thing, and that's really not correct at all. I mean, the APIs are there. The word progressive is key into that statement. People seem to forget the progressive portion of it. I don't quite keep in mind it's progressive. Stayed with me. So there is kind of that disconnect. But again, to the point you made earlier, right? There's a lot of places right now that are mobile only. There is no desktop out there. So you do have to look at your user base and go, well, where are my users doing? Like, do desktops even exist in my marketplace? Am I a television that's sitting on a wall somewhere and I need, 15 to 20 feet, visibility? You have to take these things into account as you build any sort of app.
So Justin, you went to the Progressive Web App Roadshow in US, is that right? Or?
Yeah.
No,
I'm going next month. I got to go to the one in Mountain View.
Okay, because I was just wondering, because we've seen all these progressive web apps and they've all been like in Africa or Asia. So I was kind of like looking for like what's going on in the States. Is anyone looking at these things? Is it becoming important or?
I can tell you from just sort of internally things, because I build corp applications for corps, and we've converted. We're on our 5th one this year that are converting over existing applications that had some offline functionality into progressive web apps, because it makes sense for them. Their employees live and die in a web browser, like that's where they work.
So this is
web apps make sense for them.
This is all the way, or just like service work offline, or you also
this
do
is
like
pretty much as far as we can get.
Okay.
We have a lot of Windows and Mac desktops at the moment, so on the Chrome OS side, where people are like in the field with Chrome OS devices, that's an easier story because you get the add to home screen banner anyhow on Chrome OS now, so it's not a stretch. But again, the UI UX is different when you're on Windows or Mac or on a desktop, because the expectation is that they don't care about that icon, or at least in our experience. They're like, look, we can't give you the icon exactly because it doesn't quite. They're like, we don't care. We're working in tabs all day long anyhow. Yeah. Can I still open my tabs in this application? Of course you can. Yep. Okay, I'm good. And you still get the again, it's that progressive nature. Like, you're not changing the expectation of what that user wants to do. You're just giving them primarily we give them a huge speed boost, particularly with Service Worker and some of the newer techs. Push is real big now too. Like, push is something that they all kind of want because it gives you that real-time sort of thing without a lot of hacks. So you can get push fairly easily now across the board, and that's really sticky in most cases. It just makes people stay in the browser longer, which is where they want to be anyhow. So from an internal perspective, yeah, I mean, I'm converting them left and right, baby.
So what about like upcoming web APIs interest you? Like what are you most excited about? Streams or like background sync, foreign fetch?
Background sync is background sync will be huge for a lot of things I do, primarily because we have a lot of data heavy apps. So, people think, oh, you have 20 or 25 megs worth of data. We're talking like hundreds, if not a gigabyte worth of data that shuffles around on some of these apps that we do. And
but isn't that a problem which goes against like some of the progressiveness? Like people install progressive web apps because they don't want these apps like updating in the background by themselves and like wasting people's bandwidth.
No, and I agree with that. I should point out these are really specific apps for internal ops. So I think the consumer variation is a little bit different than what you're going to do internally. Internally, the requirements differ. So we know sort of the network they're on. We know we know the IP space they're on. Like we know how they exist in the world. From a consumer standpoint or from a mobile standpoint, when things are in the field, the experience is going to differ. Like you do have to be very cognizant of bandwidth. You can't sit there and go, "Hey, I'm a cellular connection. I should update this huge data set that I'm using to do land layout calculations or some random thing." Like that's not the time. Even for a corporation's going, I don't want to spend that money. Like you do have to be smart. You need the progressive nature of it and understand the context of which that user is in. So there, the network the network APIs side of life, we're trying to make a determination of
So now this is
on and everything else is going to be huge, I think, overall.
So now this is a talk about like Crosswalk. Have you used Crosswalk for these corporations, and how does the future look for you? Migrating everyone to progressive web apps, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, we use Crosswalk. We don't use Crosswalk quite as much internally. We don't particularly feel the need because they're primarily the web is okay. Like they have iOS and Android devices. They have a wide range of devices. So we kind of know the landscape of what it needs to work on. And the web gives that a little bit more. You could do it with Crosswalk, make no mistake. We've done a couple where before service worker really sort of stuck, like you end up with that situation of how am I going to get some of this into an offline state? So, IndexedDB, some interesting tricks. Like you can do a lot with Crosswalk on that side that you couldn't necessarily do with the web without a lot of additional work, particularly like, we all, progressive web apps, you have an app shell, yay. Well, beforehand when you didn't have service worker and you didn't have any means to do that, that was hard to do. Like having an app shell with app cache and everything else could be dangerous. So we always had to be very careful about how you did that. Otherwise, you break many things. Externally, from a consumer standpoint, we've used Crosswalk quite a bit to take web apps that were built for the web into sort of an app store space where that client has wanted to go. And that makes a lot more sense for them as a whole. And that's a little bit easier of a thing to understand. The flow is a little bit different. There's not as much cache data that we need. We still have cache data, obviously, but that's kind of the skinny.
Okay.
But again, I think both are very useful. Like I can't stress that enough. From a usability standpoint, I think the kicker is that we have choice, right? And choice is, I think, the key. Because the APIs are getting better as a whole on the web. If I need to embed something, I have Crosswalk that exists today. I also have 27 tools I can choose from a wide variety of platforms. If I need to build that thing and put it into my product from an embed standpoint, whether that's a TV or an STB or whatever I'm building, that's
so we mentioned some new APIs like especially like IoT kind of APIs like Web Bluetooth. Is that something which is important for you, for your clients?
I think so. I think the kicker is that there are so many cases that they hadn't considered. You look at the web as a whole, the nice thing about getting new technologies is that it opens up a new set of doors. You can say, wow, that thing I thought about 10 years ago, I really wanted to do. Bluetooth presence, for instance, and things like that. Like those are things that I tried years ago in like a variety of ways. And now we have physical web. Like, yay.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to, do some of those crazy hack things. I can just build the thing I want to build. And that's that's pretty powerful. And at the pace the web moves now, we all, I think if you're old enough to remember the dark times, which, as being older and, I'm remembering the dark times, it's a lot different now. You can look forward to the future. Beforehand, you couldn't really look forward to the future, right? If you were in that sort of web sphere, there was that just really unhappy period of time where the web is not moving. Damn it.
So you probably know there's going to be some Apple announcement tomorrow, so there might also be a new Safari version. And what are you looking forward to the most?
I'm looking forward to having Blink on in iOS.
I think that
can I make that request? Man.
Shadow DOM.
Shadow DOM would be great. It's in slots and whatnot. Service worker, man, those would be happy times. The web components package of things. This has become Justin rambling about things what Justin wants now. So anyone can stop me at any time.
Shadow DOM is in the next version of Safari, though, right? Shadow DOM.
They're releasing some preview versions, and fetch is turned on by default. Shadow DOM, as far as I know, is turned on by default. They had WebP for a short while, but it was removed, which I think is sad. But you never know whether these things will actually ship before they actually launch it next. Which I don't know if that will happen tomorrow, if there'll be preview or not. But let's see.
I'm just looking forward to ditching having to support iOS 8.
So what's the problem with iOS 8?
I want to get to the point where a lot of the APIs I tend to use are supported in there. So that was the first one that had WebGL, I believe. Other than their closed off ad system that had GL all the way back to 4 or something.
Yeah.
So, but that would be good because we the debuggers won't really support that. They turn it off, so you're kind of forced to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't like that, I do like that, so that Safari can at least move a little further.
But a lot of things has happened with Safari this year.
Yeah, it's been a whole lot better.
Yeah.
And I know there's some people working really hard on there. It's just like you said, you know they're working hard. You see the chatter on GitHub and Twitter, but what will be released? We don't know when or whatever because we're kept in the dark on that.
Hey, web payments that match, or that would be. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That's a random pipe dream on my part, probably. What do you guys? What do you want out of it, Kenneth? What is the thing on iOS that you would like to see?
Well, obviously, I would like to have the pillars for progressive web apps, so service worker with caching, Fetch API, which apparently is becoming part of iOS. The web app manifest, but that's streaming. Of course, web components. I love web components, so getting that on iOS, so it's the same on Chrome and on iOS, and having it performant, I think will make a big difference. Because I know all these people that do web things say, web, you can just use frameworks or it's awesome, and but I kind of like that the web platform has one way of doing things. It's supported really well because ease of developer productivity is very important. I remember when I started writing web apps, and I was but this is a document. It's really good for text, but I have no idea how to write a drawer, sliding in from the left. It was really, really difficult. And now at least where you get these small components, everything is encapsulated. You can actually look at it, you can understand it, or you can just take the components you need. I think that's pretty powerful. I do understand that some people want to get into a big framework like React, but maybe I just have a website. I just need this one single component. The rest is just HTML. And I might not want to convert all my website to a big React app for that purpose. Or another tool, another framework.
Well, and there are. I think sometimes we all forget where you start. It's nice that we have really nice tools and tooling. I mean, tooling's always getting better. You got the big frameworks, and that's great if you have something that you need to scale up into this huge sort of ginormous thing. But that's not where we all start. getting started. I think we had this conversation last week with Paul too about, we talk about just the it's very difficult to get started now. Like beforehand, here's 3 things you got to know: HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. Good luck. Here's your browser API footprint. But now it's like, hey, by the way, you got to ship that thing on iOS. It's got to use this other thing. You're probably going to use, these other 3 things. And although, by the way, it's also got to work on this giant billboard we have across town. Same thing, can't be different. Don't make them different. That costs more money. And then, the junior developer sitting there going, I don't know what you're talking about. I just learned what var meant the other day. And then it's just, chaos, We have a tendency to forget. So I think composability is key, because that's how I remember the web when I started out. Easily composed.
And hopefully all, things that come out new will all have progressive enhancement built in, right?
Yeah. I'd like to see push notification on iOS, web push notifications.
Yes. How did I forget that? Thank you. Yes, let's make that happen tomorrow. I'm sure you guys can do it in a day. I know you're out there listening, Apple people.
All right.
And,
so
some elements, please.
Oh, yes. Let us not forget.
I feel like our list is really long.
Yeah, why don't we just put in all of the things? That would be great. So, thank you guys for coming on. Is there other stuff that we missed, or should we wrap it up, because we're significantly over time?
I think we can wrap it up. Like, we can always do another talk if there's things that we're missing.
Well, it's a good conversation.
There's a lot of topics.
Yeah, there is. I definitely want to touch more on the web Bluetooth and web NFC. A lot of these, because I know you Kenneth particularly, and Justin, I know, have worked on a lot of that stuff and presenting it at DevFests and other.
But just generally, all of the newer kind of APIs would be really cool to talk about. Look at some of the potential, things you could use it for and that kind of stuff. That'd be a really cool episode.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Like we're also working on generic sense APIs, so like making new APIs that work the same. So if you have an accelerometer or maybe geolocation API, like the developer will know how to use those APIs, and even bringing that to Node.js. So even in a Node environment like IoT, it would work the same way. So just like you can reuse what you've learned from one platform to the other. Cool. And hopefully that will be extended to other APIs like barometers, to temperature sensors, humidity sensors, etc.
So we got a question from Twitter. Hollow Leo asks, how can they get access to the microphone in a web app?
Just using the regular media capture API from the web, requesting permissions to Windows, and then on Android you need to make sure it's packaged on your manifest, like you define it, that you want the microphone permission.
Yeah, if you use Crosswalk.
Question answered. It was that simple. Yay. We're now taking questions from Twitter.
iOS too?
I actually don't know what works on iOS. I know that Paul Lewis wrote an app for a dictaphone app, and I think there was some things not working on iOS, but I don't remember whether that was the capture or actually storing the file itself. But there were some limitations at least.
Yeah, maybe it hooks into WebRTC or something. I don't know, but then it's not on Safari now anyway. So, anyways. Thank you guys for coming on. Alexis, Kenneth, awesome work. Keep it up.
Thank you. We're doing our best. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely. We should get you guys on again sometime soon.
Sure.
So thank you so much. This has been episode number 105, Developing with Crosswalk. You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at +the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.